Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers solicitation, the right to petition, and officer conduct, and is brought to us by Kimberly Totsky's channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. Before we dive into the interaction, I would like to invite you all to check out the ATA Patreon page where you can find ad-free, uncensored, and exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And right now, we're offering a limited-time 1-year membership with 2 months completely free. On the evening of January 2nd, 2021, Battle Creek resident LaRon Marshall was going door-to-door at the Wind Tree Townhomes complex in Battle Creek, Michigan, collecting signatures in an effort to form a tenants association to combat crime and mistreatment within his community. Mr. Marshall had already collected nearly 100 signatures before he knocked on the door of Kimberly Totsky and asked her if she would like to participate in the formation of the association. While engaging in small talk with Ms. Totsky, Mr. Marshall was approached by Deputy Hamilton and another unidentified deputy from the Calhoun County Sheriff's Office.
That's not what you want.
I do too.
Put your hand behind your back.
For what?
Put your other hand behind your
My
back.
kids is right there.
Okay.
You're
You're either going to follow instructions or you're going to go to jail.
What instructions?
Come over
Has
here
he
and talk to
broken
me,
the
like
law?
I said.
Has he broken the law?
That's what I'm asking. What law am I breaking? That's what I'm trying to ask.
Has he broken the law?
You haven't told me nothing.
Look, we don't want.
Soliciting without a permit.
Soliciting what?
Whatever you're soliciting.
So you don't even know what I'm
What are
doing.
you soliciting?
That's why we're trying
Come
to
over here and talk to me.
Just
Thank you.
keep that rolling.
I'm
man.
recording. You don't have to get off my porch.
Oh yeah, I really don't care. This is our problem. I'd rather get out of the report. So what's up?
If there's problems, if you don't want him doing that, then that can be done. But like, he's not doing anything wrong.
Where's your ID?
He lives here.
Give me your ID.
For what?
Has he broken the law? Is he
Your
committing a
ID.
crime?
I just told you.
Soliciting without a
Soliciting
permit.
what?
Whatever you're doing.
Soliciting. I haven't asked anybody for any money or anything. So what am I soliciting?
Then what are you doing?
Have I asked you? Did I ask you for any money?
No.
So what am I? I'm not
He hasn't tried to
soliciting
sell
money.
me anything.
Yeah.
Then what are you doing?
It's collecting signatures. That's what I'm doing. I can
For
do that.
what?
It doesn't matter. I could do that.
It does matter.
We have a right to-
caller, which is why we're here making contact with you.
Okay. What does the caller tell you? I didn't ask nobody for any money or anything. For what?
The deputies accuse Mr. Marshall of soliciting, and Mr. Marshall informs the deputies that he is collecting signatures and has not requested any money from anyone he has spoken to. Outside of lewd or sexual acts, the crime of soliciting generally refers to approaching citizens in an attempt to beg or ask for money, or exchange an unrequested service for money, and soliciting is ordinarily regulated at the municipal level. The legislative framework for soliciting varies dramatically from city to city, with some cities outlawing the act altogether, and others drafting very specific protocols for allowing solicitation to some degree. For example, the city of New York allows the solicitation of charitable funds through the acquisition of a city-sponsored licensing program. And, in contrast, the city of Detroit permits the solicitation of food or money without a license, so long as it does not interfere with the safety and security of others. Section 618.25 of the Battle Creek Municipal Code once outlawed the act of solicitation. However, this section was repealed by the passage of Ordinance 04-04 on February 17, 2004. Even if Mr. Marshall was soliciting, there are no municipal, state, or federal statutes that would prevent him from doing so. Nonetheless, it is clear that the phrase solicitation does not apply to Mr. Marshall's attempt to gather signatures. And the First Amendment offers explicit protection from government entities while exercising the right to petition. The right to petition can be traced back to the drafting of the Magna Carta in 1215, and, through various disputes between the English Parliament and the dominating Stuart monarchy, rose to prominence once again with the Petition to Right in 1628, which was a constitutional document that set out specific individual protections against the state. The right was further legitimized with the drafting of the landmark English Bill of Rights Act of 1688, which was largely attributed to the revolutionary ideas of philosopher and physicist John Locke. During this time, the English government began to prioritize the concept of individual liberty while maintaining their quasi-monarch structure of governance, and many of these documents came to serve as the framework for America's Constitution. Roughly 100 years after the English Bill of Rights was legislated into effect, America became an independent nation and drafted its very own Bill of Rights in 1791, which included the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances in the very First Amendment. Mr. Marshall's petition stems from the legal concept of tenants' rights, and would fall under the scope of protection guaranteed by the First Amendment, because the purpose of a tenants association includes forcing a property owner or manager to adhere to the governmental standards associated with those rights. The fact that the deputies, who are government agents, made a concerted effort to intrude upon that right would also be a factor in deciding whether Mr. Marshall's First Amendment rights were violated. There is nothing illegal about what Mr. Marshall was doing, and, as demonstrated in this section, Mr. Marshall's conduct is vehemently protected by the Constitution. This interaction should have ended the moment that Mr. Marshall informed the deputies that he was collecting signatures, but the deputies decided to shift their focus to ascertaining Mr. Marshall's identity.
Okay, where's your ID at?
See, they ask all the questions, but they don't want to answer no questions.
If you fail to identify yourself, you're going to go to jail.
But he's not committed a crime and he's not doing anything wrong. We have the right. We have the right to petition in this country.
Back, you're under arrest.
No, I'm not.
Turn around and put your hands
I got
behind
the
your
right to
back. You're under
petition.
arrest.
What am I going to arrest for?
Can I have your badge number,
Hindering
sir?
and opposing. Turn around and put your hands
Hindering
behind your
what?
back.
There's no investigation
Nobody's
because there's
stopping
been
you.
no crime
Nobody's
committed.
stopping you.
Okay, well, don't play with my
live
rights.
in
I need your
front
badge
Turn
number.
around and put your hands behind your back.
I'm
For the
Leron, I live
fourth
in the front
time,
of
you
there.
are under arrest.
I live in the front up there. I just told you that.
Deputy
Turn around
Hamilton, and
No.
who
put
are
your hands
you?
behind your
I'm
back.
Leron.
Can I have your badge number, officer?
Hands
Told him my
behind
name.
your
What is he
back.
asking for? I just
How
told
many
him my
times
name.
I gotta tell you to put your hands behind your back?
Please don't do this
Told
right
him my name.
now.
That's my name, right?
How many times are we gonna do this? Turn around, you're under arrest.
So what you gonna do with the kids?
You're under arrest.
I said what you gonna do about my
We'll
kids?
figure that out. Turn around.
You'll figure that out. Seriously? What's he under arrest
There you
for?
go.
First, the deputy tells Mr. Marshall that he will be arrested for failing to identify himself, but then changes the alleged charge to hindering an investigation and orders Mr. Marshall to place his hands behind his back. Michigan is not a stop and identify state, and in order to demand identification from a citizen, an officer must acquire reasonable suspicion to believe that the citizen is involved in criminal activity. According to the Calhoun County Sheriff's Office, the original 911 caller reported a suspicious person that was possibly soliciting, and when the deputies arrived on the scene, they were given more than enough evidence to conclude that Mr. Marshall was not soliciting. Not only did Mr. Marshall have a list of signatures in his hand and made a concerted effort to inform the officers that he was not soliciting, but this information was also validated by Ms. Totsky, who was an independent witness. The deputies did not have enough evidence to suggest that Mr. Marshall was soliciting, and, as mentioned before, the city of Battle Creek has no statutes that pertain to the act of soliciting, which means that the deputies did not have reasonable suspicion to believe that Mr. Marshall was engaged in criminal activity. Furthermore, the deputies accused Mr. Marshall of obstructing or hindering their investigation, and Michigan has several laws pertaining to the obstruction of an investigation. Section 750-478A of the Michigan Penal Code states that a person who is informed by a peace officer that he or she is conducting a criminal investigation shall not attempt to intimidate, hinder, or obstruct a peace officer in the discharge of his or her official duties by a use of unauthorized process. And the code goes on to define an unauthorized process as a document simulating legal process that is prepared or issued by an illegitimate agency that is not a court, or that would otherwise be legal process except that it was not lawfully filed with or recorded by a governmental agency. Subsection 6 of this code creates an exception for individuals assembling lawfully, or lawful free expression of opinions, or designation of group affiliation or association. It is clear that Mr. Marshall was not in violation of this code, and would likely fall under the exemptions specifically outlined within the language of the statute. Section 750.479C of the Michigan Penal Code is another version of the state's obstruction law, and essentially criminalizes the act of knowingly concealing facts or providing false statements or documents material to an investigation. Once again, Mr. Marshall was not violating any part of this statute, which renders his arrest invalid, especially considering that the deputies did not have reasonable suspicion to effectuate a detainment in the first place.
Let's do this.
Oh, you don't need this.
Give it
Here,
to
take
me.
this. Please. I'm in up there.
Yeah. What's your badge number, officer? You legally
You
have
don't
to
need
provide
it.
that to
Oh,
me.
we do this.
You're
You have
on
to
my
provide
property, on my camera, under my surveillance, with my sticker in the window, and you owe me a badge number, both of you.
Both of
We'll
you.
get you that when we're finished.
She asked
When
you
you're
right
finished,
now.
I need a badge number now, or I'm going to have them call them, and then I'll have your superiors come down here. There are due processes that you need to follow as officers, and
right.
you're not. So please give me your badge number. I'm not asking you for anything else but a badge number.
I'm dealing with him, not you.
Oh,
You're
you
on my
her
property, on my camera, under my surveillance, so we have a problem.
I haven't even done
Because you
anything.
definitely tripping.
I'm talking to her. You told her I'm soliciting. How am I soliciting if I'm not asking any money? I ain't asking nobody for any money.
I'll take y'all home in a second.
All we've been doing is just collecting signatures.
Yeah, I can do that. I'm asking.
Like,
Walk
the
down here,
people
sir.
out front,
Watch
they're
your
not
shit.
doing that much stuff. Like, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. All we're doing
Hey, stay with her. Stay with her. Take home.
Come on here.
The deputies escort Mr. Marshall to their patrol vehicle, and the unidentified deputy violently shoves Mr. Marshall into the vehicle and slams the door closed. Moments later, Deputy Hamilton returns to Ms. Totsky's porch to hand her a business card with both of their badge numbers.
Was that necessary? Was that really necessary to do in front of his kids? Y'all is wrong as hell, and he lives here.
Okay.
I got the utmost respect for you. Here's your mom. I got the utmost respect for you officers when you come out here and look out, but he lives here, and he was on my porch, and he didn't start a thing. And y'all is wrong. Every last bit of this was wrong, and y'all done messed up. You messed up. You messed up. I'm finna take these babies home.
What the fuck's happening now?
They arresting people that live here. Collecting signatures is our legal right. No, you don't. Okay, well, you can look it up. Y'all obviously have been here. I'm not doing this with you. Y'all were wrong. Y'all was definitely wrong. What are you gonna do? Arrest me on my porch when I've done nothing wrong?
Are you
I'm not
taking his children?
Yeah, I'm definitely taking them as soon as you
then
get
I
away
need
from me
your
because
name.
I feel threatened. I just talked to
I
their
need
mama
your
on the
name.
phone.
Where's she at?
Right up front with their
coming
newborn
over?
baby. No,
She gonna
she's
come over?
not. Get up on my porch.
The unidentified deputy attempts to coerce Ms. Totsky into providing her identification, but she refuses to comply, and the deputy walks away. Ms. Totsky was under no legal obligation to provide her identification to the deputies, and given the circumstances of this arrest, her decision to take Mr. Marshall's children back to their house was not unreasonable. I find it difficult to believe that a court would consider the deputy's decision to leave Mr. Marshall's children with Ms. Totsky to be unreasonable, considering that their home was within walking distance and Mr. Marshall authorized Ms. Totsky to take them to their house. In most situations, one of the deputies would have likely driven the children to their home and surrendered them into the custody of their mother. And in cases where both parents are arrested, it is generally the policy of most departments to contact Child Protective Services to arrange for the children to be handed over to the nearest relative. All that said, it appears that the deputy's reasoning for attempting to ascertain Ms. Totsky's identity was to ensure that she could be contacted in the event that something happened to the children once the deputies left the scene. And there is a legitimate possibility that the Calhoun County Sheriff's Office could be held liable in such an event. A more professional approach might have been to have a separate deputy escort Ms. Totsky and the children to their home to guarantee that the children made it home safely.
Do you see this shit right now?
My dad got a lawyer, so they definitely gonna get sued for this shit.
I have no idea what's going on. Came in and grabbed my phone.
The deputies returned to their patrol car and eventually left the scene without further incident, and Ms. Totsky walked Mr. Marshall's children back to their home safely. Mr. Marshall was arrested and was charged with felony resisting and obstructing an officer, which falls under Section 750.81d of the Michigan Penal Code. However, this is yet another statute that Mr. Marshall was clearly not in violation of, as it defines obstruction as the use or threatened use of physical interference or force, or a knowing failure to comply with a lawful command. Mr. Marshall was not physically combative in any way, and none of the orders issued by the deputies were lawful. On January 6th, Calhoun County Sheriff Steve Hinckley and Undersheriff Tim Hurt issued a statement via Facebook declaring that the department had completed a preliminary investigation into the incident and that the unidentified deputy was being placed on an administrative leave until further investigations could be conducted. The sheriff stated that the deputy was, quote, acting on ordinances that were valid in other communities and not this particular community. On January 9th, the charges against Mr. Marshall were dropped and the Calhoun County Undersheriff issued an apology in person. As of the writing of this episode, I have spoken to Mr. Marshall's attorney, Jennifer Lord, who informed me that they are still in the investigative stage of the interaction and are deciding whether or not to pursue further legal action. Overall, the Calhoun County Sheriff's deputies get an F for attempting to enforce a statute that doesn't exist, displaying a fundamental misunderstanding of reasonable suspicion, and for violently arresting Mr. Marshall when he had committed no crimes. It is clear from the video that the deputies had no interest in carrying out a legitimate investigation to determine the legality of Mr. Marshall's conduct, even when presented with overwhelming evidence that Mr. Marshall was not breaking a law that didn't even exist. To say that the unidentified deputy engaged in an act of gross incompetence would be an understatement. And this is yet another interaction that would certainly warrant a lower grade than an F. The very fundamental elements of policing were called into question by this deputy's conduct, and at the very least, members of law enforcement should be more than familiar with their municipality's statutes, even if they demonstrate a complete ignorance of the constitutional protections they are charged with protecting and the state-level statutes they are authorized to enforce. There is simply no excuse for this deputy's conduct, and there is no doubt that the deputy's ego played a major role in the outcome of this interaction. I see no other recourse for the public at large outside of this deputy's termination, and this is the precedent that must be set in order to restore the reputation of American policing as a whole. It'll be interesting to see the outcome of the Calhoun County Sheriff's investigation, and I firmly believe that Mr. Marshall has a strong federal case on his hands. Mr. Marshall gets an A, because although he could have exercised his right to silence more tactfully, he made a legitimate effort to dispel the deputy's suspicions without compromising his constitutional rights, refused to allow the deputy to intimidate him, and followed up this interaction with the proper legal action. There should never be a circumstance where a citizen is arrested for laws that are non-existent, especially when they are exercising a right that is protected by the Constitution. Mr. Marshall did more than what was legally required of him to prove his innocence, and everything he told the officers was corroborated by an independent witness and plainly observable facts. Mr. Marshall managed to tear down the deputy's assertions without even referencing the fact that no solicitation laws existed, and both Mr. Marshall and Ms. Totsky reminded the officers about the right to petition. Mr. Marshall was never rude or confrontational with the deputies and managed to remain calm while being unlawfully arrested. Mr. Marshall excellently maintained a degree of professionalism that eclipsed the rude and condescending conduct of the deputies, and, as mentioned before, he will likely fare very well in the courtroom if he decides to sue the deputies and the department. There is certainly an argument to be made that the department bears some level of liability for the deputy's lack of training in regards to the Battle Creek Municipal Code, and it is difficult to understand how the department could continue to employ a deputy who is not familiar with the laws of his community. I commend Mr. Marshall for having the courage to challenge the legitimacy of his detention and the conviction to follow up this encounter with legal action. I also commend Ms. Totsky for having the courage to defend Mr. Marshall against the deputies and the awareness to begin recording this encounter. Be sure to give your support to Ms. Totsky's channel. You can find a link in the description below. Let us know if there's an interaction or legal topic you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the ATA Patreon page for more police interaction content.